indeed pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker of the day. Julie Williamson is a partner with Karrikins Group, and she helps organizations set and execute on strategic transformation. So she's here today to walk us through how leading change starts with you. It's my pleasure to welcome Julie to the stage.
Oh my gosh, welcome everybody, and welcome to the people who are here virtually as well. I know you can't see the buzz that's in the room, but it is amazing to be here in person with so many of you today. And wow, to hear Anders talk about 40% of the people in the organization are new over the last 2 years. It feels almost trite for me to say what I'm about to say, which is that change is in the air. We're seeing things changing everywhere across the organization, but also globally around the world. Just by a show of hands, how many of you are in that group of people who are in this room for the first time? Show of hands. Look at that. That's amazing, isn't it? Congratulations to all of you. Let's give all of those folks a round of applause. Welcome to this amazing leadership team. It really is an incredible team. I've had the opportunity to get to know some of you over the last few months, and I'm delighted to be here getting to know more of you at this event as well. When we talk about change being in the air, though, from a global perspective, let's just take a zoom out, because there have been some things that have been happening in the last 20 years that have fundamentally changed business. They fundamentally changed how we consume products, how we sell products, how we work in B2C, how we work in B2B. And one of the best indicators of what we mean by changes in the air, and it's been going on for about 20 years, you can see in the S&P 500. When you look at the S&P 500 from back in 2000, look at that list of the top 5 companies in the S&P 500. Bellwether stocks for the most part in the top 4, and then, oh, who's that we see at number 5? Anybody know how old Cisco was in 2000? Anybody know how old Cisco was, roughly? Ballpark? Shout it out. About 10 years, 16 years old. They were 16 years old in 2000. So you see, for the first time in the top 5 in the S&P 500, we're starting to see this kind of like upstart company coming into that index and making waves, making significant change. You can see what happened in 2010, but what I really want to do is move up to 2020 and take a look at that list. Okay, so I just want to share with you something about the 2020 list, which is that for me, it's a little bit confronting, because I am older than every single company on that list. Is anybody else in that boat? Yeah, I see some hands up here. Yeah, so people are like, yep, I've got that too, right? It's a little confronting, isn't it? You're like, oh my gosh, I am older than every single company on that list. But it is so interesting to look at, because 2 of those companies weren't even in existence in 2020, or excuse me, in 2000. And one of them, Amazon, was very young. It was only about 6 years old in 2000. So you're seeing a remarkable shift at the most fundamental level of our economy. The companies that are moving and shaping the economy are changing at a dramatic rate, very, very quickly. Just over 20 years, we no longer see General Electric, ExxonMobil, Pfizer, any of these bellwether stocks in that top 5. Now, it's interesting that today, 2 years later, we're starting to see Tesla make moves into the top 5. We're starting to see companies that are doing graphics for gaming making moves into the top 5. Companies that we didn't even imagine a few years ago are starting to really shape our economy at a macro level. So when we say changes in the air, it's not just things that are happening around us, it's things that are shaping our economy. They're shaping how we do business. Now, does anybody know when Zebra joined the S&P 500? Now, this table you can't answer. Anybody over here know when they joined the S&P 500? All right, you can answer. Well, they're all pointing at each other, right? So if I understand correctly, you joined the S&P 500 in December of 2020. Now, I will challenge you and say, I believe that in 5 or 10 years, you could see Zebra on this list, right? Look at all of the amazing things that you're doing as you build this organization. You're bringing in great acquisitions. You're bringing in new technologies. You're looking at how you can sell bigger and better solutions to your customers that take you far beyond where you were 53 years ago, 1969, when you came out as Data Specialties Incorporated, right? And so I will still be older than all of the companies on the list if you join it at any point in time. But I can tell you that that's an exciting future to think about. And you are the people who are going to be able to shape that. All of you who are in this room right now are the leaders who are poised to be able to look at Zebra and say, how do we project forward and see that kind of growth, that kind of change in our organization as we go forward? It's such an exciting time to be a part of this organization. When we look at these macro level trends, they influence also how we come into more of a micro level view, which is how are we buying as consumers? What are we doing out there in the market? And if we take a look at years to adoption of technology, this is kind of an interesting chart too. This is US based, but it can extrapolate out to Western markets in general, and emerging markets tend to just lag a little bit behind it. But if you look at adoption rates, look at the adoption rate for the telephone, almost 91 years, to get to 80% of US households. In the 90s, by the way, there was still a number of households in the US who did not have their own telephone lines. They were on party lines or shared lines. That was in the 1990s. So you look at this long spread of adoption for technology. Today, we're seeing adoption happening much, much faster. Smartphones, just by means of example, took about 10 years to reach that same saturation point. And that acceleration, that velocity, that speed of change is continuing to grow. It's not getting any slower. People aren't lagging at all in terms of how they're adopting technology. So a really interesting way to think about what we consume. And the reason I want you to think about this is because our B2C behaviors, our consumer buying behaviors, get pulled into our B2B expectations. So when people are able to buy things and they're able to move quickly from one technology to another, they're able to try things, they're able to experiment a little bit in their B2C environments, they bring those expectations into their buying patterns in B2B. And so it does affect the entire purchasing philosophy and how we go about selling and how we go about consuming. So something to think about. A rapid change. Now, one of the interesting things that's also happened in the last about 30 or 40 years is a really significant technology price deflation. And when we look at this kind of price deflation, that also drives some of that adoption, but it's indicative, again, of the consumer expectations. They expect to be able to get a lot more technology for a lot less money. Now, when I was in college, I actually sold cell phones in the summers of 1988 and 1989. Now, if you can imagine, I just want you to think about what a cell phone looked like in the late 1980s. It was like a suitcase. I would carry one around in the trunk of my car, and I would pull it out, and I would walk into a business person's office with it, and I would try and explain to them why they should spend $6,000 on this additional briefcase that they should walk around with. And I actually sold 4 of them that summer, and I was the top salesperson. How about that? I deserve a round of applause for that, right? Now, I haven't done the math, but if you adjust for inflation, it's probably about $18,000 a pop. Anybody willing to spend $18,000 on a cell phone these days? Probably not, right? Yeah, if you spend $1,000, you're getting the top of the line new Apple phone. So you see this incredible price deflation happening in the markets. And again, I bring it to your attention because it influences buyer behavior. When people think about what they should be paying for technology, this is what comes through. So when we take all of this together and we think about it, we like to look at this lens of speed, transparency, and intersections that come together and drive incredible complexity in how we're doing business today. Speed, things are happening faster and faster. Transparency, there's more and more transparency from the consumer, for example, about your supply chain, about your distribution models. There's more and more transparency for employees. There's more and more transparency for your partners around business models. Business models are changing quickly. And we see intersections. The ability to connect across the company is where those opportunities lie. So understanding intersections as leaders becomes more and more important as you go forward. And they all come together, and what do? They create complexity. And when they create complexity, a lot of people can feel a little overwhelmed. Your people might be feeling like, wow, things are getting a lot more complicated. There's all of these acquisitions we've brought in. There's new things I'm supposed to understand. There's different parts of the business that maybe I've never heard of. What's this fetch thing? I don't know, right? They're trying to wrap their heads around all of this change that's happening in your organization. And your highest calling as a leader, the thing that you need to be focused on as a leader, is thinking about how do we create opportunity out of this complexity? How do we build opportunity from the complexity that is there? Because here's the thing, it isn't going away. We're not going to suddenly become an economy that works more slowly, that has less transparency, and that has fewer intersections, right? It isn't going away. And as leaders, you can't hope that it's going to go away, because it isn't. So that's my big message today, is complexity is something that we all need to learn to embrace in different ways. Before we do that, though, I just want to give you one moment and just say, you know what? Just take a deep breath right now. And for those of you who are virtual, do this in your home office, wherever you are. Take a deep breath. And just look at the person next to you and say, enjoy this moment. Go ahead and do it. Look at the person next to you. Say, enjoy this moment. If you're virtual, pop it in the chat. Or say it out loud to yourself. Say it to your dog, whoever's around you. Enjoy this moment. I want you to enjoy this moment because right now is as easy as it's going to get. It's as simple as it's going to get. Right? It's just every moment it gets more complex. We have new things coming in, things change. We have other things coming at us. You know, between a war in Europe, as we just heard about, is adding a lot of stress, a lot of complexity. We see new acquisitions creating a lot of stress on the system. It's not going to get any easier. So you may as well just enjoy the moment and figure out, all right, I'm going to, as a leader, embrace speed. I'm going to embrace transparency. I'm going to embrace the intersections that exist. And I'm going to embrace the opportunities that come out of the complexity, because that's where those opportunities lie. Let me just give you a quick example, and it's a very old example. Those of you who've seen my colleague Peter Sheehan have heard him talk about it. But how many people know the story, the sad tale of Sony? Sony failing to step in. I see a hand up in the back, a couple of hands. Yep, up, a couple of hands around. Here's the thing. We look at Sony through this lens of speed, transparency. Whoops, let me just go back here. There we go. Through this lens of speed, transparency, and intersections. And when you look at the opportunity that they missed, you can see that they just didn't embrace the complexity. They didn't embrace the opportunity that came out of very significant changes that were going on in the music industry. Who remembers what came out in 2001 that changed the music industry forever? What's the product that came out in 2001? I heard iPhone. iPhone actually came out a few years later. It was actually the iPod. Remember the little iPod? Yeah, did anybody have an iPod? I had one. I had a little Nano. It was pink. I loved it. It was awesome. But the iPod fundamentally changed the way that we do music. Here's the thing about Sony. In 1994, they had an MP3 player that they released in Japan. They sold about 50,000 units of it. 1994, they had the technology. They had the technology to do what Apple did. What else did Sony have? They had the technology. What else did they have? They had the brand, right? Oh my gosh, in the 90s and early 2000s, everybody wanted a Sony sound system, whether it was a CD player or speakers or whatever it might be. So they had the technology and they had the brand. What else did they have? They had the content, right? I heard over here, they had the content. Absolutely, they owned a huge music repository. So they had the brand, they had the technology, they had the content. They had one other thing that was really important. What was that? Distribution. They had distribution. So they had a distribution model that was second to none. They knew how to make the technology work. They owned the content. And they had the brand presence, and they missed the opportunity completely. Why? Because they couldn't connect quickly enough across the business. So what was happening in Japan was completely opaque for the people who were working in the US on some of the brand issues that the brand strength that they were building on. And the people who were in brand had no idea what was happening with the content people and what they were doing. They weren't able to effectively create intersections across all of those different parts of the organization. They weren't able to drive transparency, and they weren't able to move quickly as an organization. And as a result, they missed the biggest opportunity in music in the history of the world, right? There's really no other time when things have changed as dramatically as they have. And Apple was able to take advantage of that because they were able to embrace the complexity and move on that opportunity. When you look at what's happening with Zebra right now, is you're starting to bring other technologies into the organization through acquisition, as you're innovating internally, as you're looking at how do we continue to grow this company, grow this amazing organization, there will be times when you have to be really intentional as a leader about reaching out and figuring out, how do I bring in other people? How do I connect? How do I make those intersections happen? How do I take advantage of the speed with which we're able to communicate? How do I take advantage of the transparency that we have today in the business world as well as internally? That's where the opportunity lies. And I would encourage all of you to really think about that as an opportunity and not as a challenge in terms of the complexity. Let me give you a quick example that's a little bit more modern than Sony, and that's Ford. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. So we have a Ford F-150 in my family. It's a 1999 Ford F-150 that has over 300,000 miles on it. And my significant other, his name is Kevin, he loves this truck. Does anybody have someone in their life who has an automobile, car, or truck that they love? They're like, yep, I see some hands up, right? 300,000 miles on it. He loves his truck because he can work on it. He likes to do all those kinds of things. Here's the thing. We need a new truck. We can't continue to have a truck because we have a ranch, all this stuff. We have to have a modern truck that's not 22 years old. So we go out to buy a truck. Has anybody tried to buy a truck in the last 6 months? Anybody? Or maybe you're just afraid by the news reports. The news reports are true. It's very, very difficult to buy a truck right now. So when we bought that truck back in 1999, here's what we did. We walked into the dealer, we test drove a couple of trucks, we wrote a check, and then we drove off the lot with our new truck. That's how it worked in 1999. Today, in 2022, here's how it works. You make a ton of phone calls around to a bunch of dealers to see if anybody has any inventory that you can come and test drive. And if you find one, you drive 60 miles to go to that dealer and actually test drive the truck. But you're not allowed to buy that truck. Oh, no, no, no. You can't buy that truck because that's been promised to somebody else. So instead, you have to place an order. And when you place your order, which, by the way, we placed our order with a dealer in Ohio. Where do we live? We live in Denver, Colorado. But the dealer in Ohio has rights to some inventory, so he'll be getting the truck sooner than we will. Excuse me, sooner than the local Denver dealers will. So we place this order with the dealer in Ohio, and he says, okay, we think that you'll have your truck in maybe 3 to 6 months. That is not how Americans consume, right? That is not how we buy anything, but that's the reality of today. Now, they are dealing with massive consumer unhappiness around the purchasing process. And so one of the things that they did at Ford, and this is an emerging case study, by the way, I will keep you posted maybe in a couple of years and let you know if it actually plays out. But what they've done is they've wrapped their arms around the complexity that has been traditionally guiding their industry. I've done a lot of work in the auto industry, and I can tell you, it is fragmented and it is siloed. And so it's very, very difficult to be able to pull through the supply chain and pull through the customer experience and create any level of transparency. But we got this letter, and it just caught my eye not long after we placed that order. And it says, you're going to get 3 pieces of communication from Ford, which, by the way, is weird in the first place because the dealer usually holds on to that customer interaction. Dealers don't like for Ford to contact the customer directly. That's not their favorite thing. But we got this from Ford. It says you're going to get 3 emails from us. 1, when your truck has been scheduled for production. This isn't when we're making trucks again. This is when your truck, when all of the parts are here for exactly your truck, then we're going to let you know that it's ready for assembly. So what do they have to do? They have to create transparency through the supply chain so that they know when all of those parts are at their doorstep. That's unheard of, quite frankly, in the auto industry, for them to be able to have that level of transparency and be able to move that quickly with that kind of information. We're going to let you know when all of the parts have been secured. Second, we're going to let you know when your vehicle has been built. So when it rolls off the line, your truck, not just a couple of trucks got made, but your truck is rolled off the line. We're going to let you know when that happens, and then we're going to let you know when it gets shipped to the dealer. So hopefully the dealer won't be able to sell it out from under us, is what I'm thinking is the reason for that. But this is, again, hopefully it'll happen, fingers crossed. There's a lot of, if you Google what's going on with customer service with Ford right now, I don't know about it. But I think that this is just so interesting because it's a very different way of orienting towards the customer in the car buying experience. And it's forcing a lot of innovation within the car industry to be able to have this kind of transparency and to communicate this effectively with customers. Just getting this email dialed down our anxiety a lot, right? So this email alone probably prevented 4 or 5 phone calls to the dealer, and I don't know how many emails to forward about, where's our truck? Like, what's happening? When are we gonna get this very expensive automobile that we've just purchased? Customer expectations are changing around your ability to help them understand and connect with when they're going to get whatever it is that you're promising them. And in B2B, customers are bringing that expectation into that environment. So when you're a zebra going out and working with customers and you're looking at some of your own supply chain issues, one of the things to think about is how can you step into that complexity and start to communicate differently with customers about just letting them know when they might get things, how you're going to communicate with them, how you're going to set their expectations appropriately for when they'll be hearing from you. Those kinds of shifts, those kinds of changes are incredibly powerful for setting customer expectations and managing them. And they let you take that complexity and differentiate yourselves in ways that other people in the industry are not doing. So stay tuned on whether or not we get our truck and whether or not we get our emails, but it's a really interesting emerging case study. Here's the challenge to all of you as leaders, and that is things like that sound great. It's easy to say, yeah, we really should communicate differently with customers. We really should do that. Wouldn't it be great if we were more collaborative and we had more transparency? Wouldn't that be awesome? You know what I think we should do? We should be able to work with our suppliers to get more information. All of those we woulds, we shoulds, if onlys, those are things that people often say to themselves, and they're kind of like, that would be so great. I hope they do it. Anybody ever thought that? I hope they do it. Fingers crossed. I hope someone does that. I hope someone fixes that, right? I hope they do it. Well, here's the thing. Companies don't change. People do. I'll say it again. Companies don't change. People do. And those people are the people who are in this room right now. And let me just give you a quick example, a quick story. When I was working with a Midwestern insurance company a few years ago, I was working with a CFO named Mitch. And Mitch was a great guy. He wore cowboy boots and a cowboy hat, and he had a toothpick in his jaw all the time, like a very classic kind of guy. He was the CFO of this company. And this company had 6,000 spreadsheets. 6,000 spreadsheets that they used to produce their board reports and to do all their regional planning, and they were all linked together with these crazy formulas, and nobody really knew how it worked completely. And Mitch decided they needed to get off the 6,000 spreadsheets, which they did. They were a little addicted. They would do everything in Excel. How can you run an insurance company off of Excel? I don't know. But they were doing it, and he decided they needed to get an ERP system in. So fast forward, it took about 18 months. They got all of the spreadsheets moved into an ERP system, and they were generating those reports. But they were having really low adoption. So I got called into Mitch's office. Now, as a consultant, you don't want to get called into the CFO's office when he's unhappy about adoption rates of the multi-million-dollar system that he just implemented, right? That's not a great conversation to have. But I got called in. I'm going to have this conversation with him. So I sit down, and Mitch puts his feet up on the desk, as he liked to do. He has these great cowboy boots on. And he said, Julie, we have a problem. People aren't using the system. I said, yeah, I know, Mitch. We're working on it. And while I was in the meeting with him, in comes his assistant, a guy named Chris. And Chris hands him some reports that he needs for the upcoming board meeting. And they are clearly produced from Excel. And I looked at him, and I said, Mitch, are those Excel reports I'm looking at? And he said, yeah. I said, why aren't you using the ones that came out of the ERP? I don't like those. I don't like them. And I said, Mitch, where are you getting these reports from Excel? And I look at Chris, who's standing behind him, and Chris is like doing everything he can to not roll his eyes, right? He's looking at me, he's making eye contact with me, and he's like, not gonna roll my eyes. Because he was having Chris put all of the information that was coming out of the ERP back into the Excel spreadsheets so that he could get the reports that he was used to getting. And I said to him, Mitch, I can't help you. You've got an adoption problem, and I can't help you. And he said, well, what do you mean? That's what we're paying you for. I was like, yeah, you can't pay me enough to fix this problem because you are the problem. If you don't start using the reports that are coming out of the system, nobody else in your organization is going to do that. He said, what do you mean? They don't even know. They don't even know. I was like, Mitch, you're kidding yourself. Everybody in this organization knows that you are not using the reports coming out of the ERP. And I looked at Chris and I said, Chris, what do you think? Do people know? And you know, it was probably a terrible thing to do to him, but we needed to just have this rip off the Band-Aid moment, right? And he said, yeah, they know. He said, as a matter of fact, they're all maintaining their own spreadsheets alongside the ERP system because they're just waiting for you to give up on it. Because that was the signal that he was giving to everybody else in the organization. He had no idea. He just assumed that behind closed doors, he was doing things the way he always wanted to, but he wanted everybody else to change. It's easy as leaders to want to change other people. It's much harder to take ownership for changing yourself. But companies don't change, people do. And guess what? For every single person in this room, you are the people. You are the people. You are the people that everybody else is watching and that they're looking at and they're saying, are they changing? Am I supposed to change? I'm going to watch and see what all of the people in this room do. And if they change, then maybe I'll change too. But as much as you tell other people to change, it won't happen until you change yourself. You have to start with your own self and how you're showing up for the people in your organization. And when they see you start to change, then they will change too. So there is no I hope they do it. There is no I hope they do it because you are the people. Now, you're going to face some headwinds in this, absolutely. The biggest headwinds that we see actually are when people are doing well. And guess what? Zebra's doing pretty well, aren't they? We just heard all of this a little bit earlier, right? Zebra's doing great. And people will say, well, we're doing great. Why should I change? Why should we change? Well, let me tell you something. Changing when things are going well is way better than changing when things aren't going well and people are in a downward spiral. What happens when things aren't going well? We tend to lock down and we just say, okay, well, things aren't going well, so we're going to keep doing what we do, what we know how to do. We're just going to try and do it better, and we're going to try and control it more, right? And when you start to get into that, you become Sony. You start locking down on your boom boxes, and you miss the biggest opportunity in the history of music, right? When you lock down when things aren't going well, that's a terrible time to try and change, but a lot of people wait for that. We love to say, wait for a burning platform. If the platform is burning, it is too late. Your competition has already smoked you, and the customer has already left you. So take the opportunity to change while things are going well. Here's another one that we get. It's super busy. I'm super busy. How many of you wear the badge of busy? How many people here wear the badge of busy? Yeah, there's a few. So not a lot of hands up. Well, I would say, did any of you wake up this morning with nothing to do? Anyone? No, right? Nobody woke up this morning with nothing to do. We're all really busy. I'll get to it next time. That's what people are watching for. That's what people were watching with Mitch, right? They were looking at Mitch and Mitch was saying, well, I'm too busy to learn a new system. I'm too busy to do that. And I'm a very important person. I have to do board reports. I don't have the time. And as soon as people saw that, they clicked in and they said, okay, well, we're not actually going to stick with this change. And they came down to this too shall pass, right? People don't see leaders embracing the change. They just figure this too will pass. I'm going to give you one other headwind that you're going to see, and that is this idea of when they have more details, then I'll get going on it. Strategies are often complex. They're often at a level of ambiguity that people aren't 100% clear, but you're going to ask them to move on it anyway. When you start, if you might think this for yourself, or you might hear this from your people, I need more details. I need to know exactly what I'm supposed to do, and then I'll do it. That's a stall tactic for change. When it comes to change, sometimes action precedes clarity. Sometimes we have to let action precede clarity. It's like riding a bike. Somebody can explain how to ride a bike to you until they're blue in the face, but until you actually get on the bike and ride it, you're not going to know how to do it. Same thing as you look at strategic shifts, as you look at new things that are happening in your organization, as you look at integrating new technologies from acquisitions, as you look at things that are changing in your customer expectations. Sometimes you have to try things and figure it out from there. And so you talk about this idea of fail fast. We hear that in a lot of organizations. We need to fail fast. You know what? a great idea. Everybody agrees with that. Very few people are actually able to align to it because they want to wait until they have enough details that they feel 100% confident that they'll be successful before they take a step. But you have to let action precede clarity. Otherwise, you're just going to stall on making the changes that need to happen. Now, the good news is that in these headwinds, there's actually some context that you can use. There are changes happening everywhere around you. Changes are happening no matter what. Like whether you change or not, things are going to change. Whether your people change or not, their context is going to change. Customers are changing. Employees are changing. The industry is changing. And Zebra is changing. Within this framework, it's really important to remember that no matter what happens for you personally, whether you stay the same or you intentionally change, if customers are changing faster than you will become irrelevant. Now, your customers, I use that term loosely. You may have external customers, you may have internal customers. Maybe your team members are your customers for your leadership. Maybe your senior management you view as customers. Whoever you want to put in that bucket, if they're changing faster than you are, you're going to become irrelevant. And I mean, when was the last time anybody walked into a Blockbuster to rent a movie? Right? If customers are changing faster than you will become irrelevant. And you cannot stop the changes that are happening around you. Employees are looking for different kinds of things from their leaders. Customers are looking for different kinds of communication from you. Your industry is changing whether you like it or not. You have to look at all of these as opportunities to step in and change yourself. It's a really wonderful time to be able to do it at Zebra because you're coming from a position of strength, which is really exciting. Here's the thing. Like I said before, it's easy to agree with a lot of these things that I'm saying, right? It's easy to, yeah, we should embrace change, yay. Yeah, we should definitely be taking care of some of those communications to customers, yay. But agreement is insufficient. Agreement is insufficient. You have to move into alignment with how you want to lead differently in order to really take advantage of all of the things that are happening around the company and all of the ways that your customers are changing as well. How you step into that complexity and how you embrace it as an opportunity, that will make all of the difference. And I'd like to just offer you a couple of key leadership mindsets that are for this century, right? As we think about how do we take this forward, we looked at the macro level view, some of the major changes that are happening in the economy and who's shaping the economy, some of the micro level view around customers, how they're changing. How as leaders can you start to step into thinking differently about what it means to be a leader in this amazing organization? And there's 5 of them that I just want to take you through somewhat quickly. And they're really about how do I just start to tweak my mindset a little bit as a leader? How can I think differently about the opportunities that exist? And how can I help my people when it comes to speed, transparency, and intersections and the resulting complexity? How can I more effectively lead them forward in this environment? The first one is this one around continuous growth. So continuous growth is really interesting to me because with growth mindset, Carol Dweck did a great book about that. You may have read it. We talk about a growth mindset a lot. But really, the ability to learn is a muscle that we have in our brains, and we can lose it. When you start to just do the same thing over and over again, we lose the ability to learn over time. As you get older and older, it gets harder to learn new things, right? Who here is, in the last 6 months, just by show of hands, have you learned something new with intention? Like you said, I'm going to learn a new language. I'm going to learn how to play an instrument. I love that. Look around. Look at all these hands that are up, right? This is a room full of learners. Here is my encouragement to you. Let your teams know about that. Let your customers know about that. Share with them the things that you're learning. I, for one, over the winter decided to try and learn how to bake macarons. It was a colossal failure because I live at 6,000 feet and they don't rise correctly and I never got it. But I tried. I tried to learn how to make macarons. And you know what? You don't have to succeed, actually, to build the muscle. This is where that idea failing fast happens, right? Even if you don't succeed, how many of you have tried to learn a different language like 17 different times? I see a lot of heads while you're like, this is going to be the year that I conquer French. No, it never happens. But if you're trying, that's where the muscle gets built, when you're trying. So you don't even have to succeed, but you just have to try. Keep learning new things. Have a real intention around being curious. It's fine to say, I want to be curious. I'm going to ask lots of questions. Put intention behind it, intention and thought, and learn to ask really great questions. One of the things we really encourage people to do as well is to think about what are the questions you want to ask your team. When you go into a quarterly business review kind of situation, what are the questions you want to ask that brain trust of senior leaders? Too often we walk into those rooms all buttoned up with all the answers. What are the great questions you want to ask those senior leaders? You've got a brain trust in front of you. Don't worry so much about impressing them. Worry about how you can engage them, which kind of brings me to my next point, which is this idea about, as leaders, how can you excel at creating connections? Now, this room right here and this experience over the next 2 days, great opportunity for you to build some connections. Really build your network, take advantage of that. And for those of you who are joining virtually, I would really encourage you to also think about, just from a content perspective, how can you leverage some of this content to connect with people who were here in the room and maybe find out, ask some questions about what was it like to be there? How was that for you? What did you learn? What did you take away? Take advantage of the opportunity that you're participating, even if it's virtual. Here's the thing about connections, though. Connections are not just about people. We're not just saying you need to connect with humans. You also, as leaders, need to connect with the business as a whole. How do you get to know what's happening in other areas of the business so that you can step into those intersections, so that you can be the connector when somebody comes to you and says, hey, I have this problem, you can say, oh, I saw that they solved that over there. Why don't you go talk to those folks? It's having that broader view of the business that really helps you to form valuable connections that make sure that you don't lose the opportunities that are in the white space. Now, one of the really interesting things that I will share with you, we work with leaders all around the world in all sorts of companies. And the single biggest point of failure that we see for mid to senior level leaders who want to step into executive leadership is that they are so locked in on expertise in their own areas, and they're just looking down vertically, and they've got their arms around it, they know exactly what they're doing. And that hinge up into executive leadership is when you're picking your head up and you're looking across the organization, and you're starting to say, what's happening in those far corners of the business? What's happening in other regions? How can I create value over there? How can I get value from over there? How can I start to build those connections around the business? That's really where that step up happens into executive leadership. And it's a really fascinating thing for us as we work with these leaders, because you've got to be really good at what you do, but you've also got to be able to pick your head up and look across the business and form those connections. People trust people who they think understand the broader implications of the changes that they're advocating for. All right, let's take a look at the next one, which is this idea of opening up to co-creation or facilitation. Now, we were at the, I see the EMEA team over here, by the way. Hi guys, good to see you. I had this experience at our sales kickoff in EMEA. There was a really beautiful moment where a woman stood up and she said, I realized in this conversation that I need to stop talking to my customers about our products, and I need to start having a conversation with them about their problems. I need to stop talking to them, and I need to start having a conversation with them. I would encourage all of you to think about that, even with your own teams. How often are you kind of in that button-down leadership mode where you're telling people things versus having a conversation with them about what's possible? I put in here this idea, when ego goes down, courage goes up. When ego goes down, courage goes up. When we don't worry as much about having all the answers, when we don't worry as much about how we're perceived or what's happening kind of around us and being able to control it all, courage goes up. Our ability to innovate, our ability to learn from others, our ability to have generative conversations goes up significantly. And there's one thing that you hold on to from this moment in this conference. I want you to walk away with that. When ego goes down, courage goes up, and it lets us create the space to co-create with our colleagues to facilitate conversations instead of feeling like we have to have all the answers inside of us. So one more quick thing to think about, this idea of visualization. So visualization, to me, it's cheap, it's easy, and it works, right? But we don't do it as leaders. Professional athletes have been doing it for a long time. Speakers do it, performers do it, politicians do it. Visualization, cheap, easy, and it works. You have this Be Here Now program at Zebra. If you haven't explored it, I would encourage you to. It's something that will help you from a mindfulness perspective. But if as a leader, you're really stepping into the complexity of today's business, being able to really visualize yourself in those conversations, how you want to show up, what you want to accomplish, what's going to come out of it, it absolutely works. It's cheap, it's easy, and it works. There's a famous study from a few years ago. A guy out of Stanford did some research with first-generation college students. Is anybody a first-generation college student? Anybody? Yeah? Great. Congratulations, by the way. Congratulations. It's a huge achievement to be a first-generation college student. And there's a huge dropout rate after the freshman year for first-generation college students. And in this study, he had people who had successfully completed their freshman year. He had them sit down and write a letter to the next incoming class of first-generation students. And in that letter, he asked them to visualize all of the things that went well in their first year, and how could they help this next group of incoming first-generation students to really keep the faith, right? To kind of stick with it and get through that first year, and what could they expect to celebrate? What could they expect to have their positive experiences be? He had them write all of that down. It's a form of visualization. 4 years later, the people who had participated in that study had almost an 87% graduation rate, which is phenomenal. The average graduation rate for first-generation college students hovers just under 20%. So it's a big difference just in a little visualization exercise, which, by the way, they didn't even know they were doing. He was just asking them to visualize all of the positive things that they would tell other people about what that college experience was in the first year and what they would expect it to be in the next few years. Just an example of how it's cheap, it's easy, and it works. You don't have to be a participant in a study, but you can take a few minutes to visualize for yourself. What's it going to look like to actually kill that presentation? What's it going to look like to facilitate a new conversation with my colleagues? How can I really step into that space? When you think about being a leader in an organization like Zebra, one of the things I really want to leave you with, and this is the last of our 5 mindsets, is this idea of bringing optimistic energy. You know what? Being an optimist is a brave choice. In business, it's so easy to be a cynic. It's so easy to be pessimistic. It's so easy to be the person who says no, right? But being an optimist and bringing that energy, it takes a lot of courage. And I would really encourage you to tap into that for yourselves. Here's the thing, though. Being an optimist is not being delusional, right? You don't have to look at a really bad situation and be like, oh, we are missing our numbers by 50%, but it's all great. It's no problem. We're in great shape. That's not optimism. That is delusion, right? Optimism is when you can look at a tough situation and say, yeah, things are bad, but I believe in my team, and I believe in our ability, and I believe that we can move through this. I believe we can solve it. We might not solve it this quarter, but we are on the right track, or we'll adjust if we need to. Optimism is in believing in yourself, and it's believing that others can do hard things. It's not believing that everything is fine when clearly it's not fine. So just keep that distinction in mind. Don't be delusional. People pick that up really quickly, and they're like, that's not for me, no thank you. But if you're optimistic, if you invest in the energy that it takes to believe in people's ability to do hard things, you will see amazing things happen with your people. The more that you show up with a tinge of cynicism or a tinge of pessimism, the more your teams will amplify it. As human beings, I'm a social scientist, I can tell you, as human beings, we amplify negative emotions very, very quickly. It's much harder to amplify positive emotions. It's much harder to amplify things like optimism. Why? Because it's not, quite frankly, as important to mammals, especially people who are lower on the creatures that are lower on the food chain. We're very attuned to anxiety, to fear, to skepticism, to anything that falls in that category. We're highly attuned to it as creatures. We're not as attuned to all of those positive things. So you have to amplify it more than you might ever expect. You have to keep coming back to it. You have to repeat yourself. You have to kind of really lean into that opportunity to bring that optimistic energy and believe and express your confidence that the team can do hard things. It will pay off in spades, I promise you. And again, this is one of those ones that's cheap, easy, and free. Right? Like you can actually do it, and it works. So think about bringing that optimistic energy. As you go forward over the next couple of days, you're going to hear some amazing speakers, and you're going to really have the opportunity to get to know more about what's happening at Zebra, and also how you as leaders can continue to level up your own skills. I would really encourage you to remember what I said earlier, which is that it starts with self. It starts with self. It starts with you really taking ownership of how can I embrace these mindsets? How can I start to look at complexity and see the opportunity in it? Where are there ways that we can continue to lean in and make changes because we are the people? Nobody else is coming. It's all for you to have this opportunity to really take Zebra into the next age, into the next decade, and maybe into the top 5 of the S&P 500. I just think it's so exciting to be you right now. You are in this amazing organization. You have this amazing group of people around you. For those of you who are virtual, you're able to join us in a way that 2 years ago, quite honestly, we wouldn't have ever even considered. It's just a great time to be a leader in this organization. There's so much potential. There's so much to be done. And I know that this is a great group of people to do it. So I just want to say thank you very much for having me here. I hope I've given you some great ideas that you can take into your own leadership and over the next couple of days. So thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.